And let's go now to the next person on the phone tonight. Welcome to our open forum program. Please go ahead with your call.
Thanks for taking my call, Chris. And I have 4 verses for you to read. The first one is Matthew 24:30.
Okay, Matthew 24:30. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
And Mark 16, verses 17 and 18.
Mark 16, verse 17, and these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover.
And the last verse is Luke 21:25.
Luke 21:25. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity the sea and the waves roaring.
Question is in reference to this word sign, as in reference to how it was used in Romans 4:11 with the sign of circumcision, and we know that circumcision is spiritual circumcision because it speaks of the seal of righteousness. My question is, in these verses, would these signs point to the spiritual realm, not the physical realm like we always what we thought?
Yeah. I've been thinking along the same lines that, when we read, Matthew 24:30, where the previous verse told us about the sun's dark, the moon does not give its light. And then it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And Luke 21:25 tells us the sign is the darkened sun and moon and stars. So that is the sign, and it's not a physical thing in any way, as the sun, moon, and stars are representing the lights of the gospel. God himself typified by the sun, the word of God, the Bible, the moon, and the elect children of God, the stars, who would be the carriers of the gospel. So every aspect of God's gospel program, as far as evangelization is concerned, goes dark. It's over with once we reach Judgment Day, and that's the sign. That's the sign that we find in the Bible. Now, Jesus was the Jews were constantly after him. Show us a sign. Show us a sign you're the Messiah. And he said, no sign shall be given unto you except the sign of the prophet Jonah. The prophet Jonah. As Jonah was 3 days, and let me make sure I get it right. In Matthew 12, it says, in Matthew 12, verse 39, verse 38, they say, Master, we would see a sign from thee. And then in verse 39, but he answered and said unto them, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, they wanted a sign, a physical, natural sign, an outward sign from Christ. And he said, no sign will be given you. And as a matter of fact, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after physical signs, and no sign will be given you except, and then he seems to go against what he just said, except there's a reason why, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, where could they find the sign of the prophet Jonah? You had to read the book of Jonah. You had to go to the Bible. So the Bible gives the sign that's the only permissible place to look. When God tells us there's signs in the sun, moon, and stars, we look up into the heavens. I mean, there's certain pastors and churches or church organizations, and they every time there's a blood moon, they'll say, oh, this has to do with the coming of the Lord. And you see, they're looking up at a literal event in the celestial bodies, something you can see with your physical eyes that God does not sanction. That's contrary to what he tells us. For a sign, you must look to the Bible, and it's in the Bible when we learn of God's judgment program, and we learn what the sun, moon, and stars represent. It's all from the Bible, that then we can understand, okay, Christ is the Son, he's the Word, and God is the Son. And the Son has to do with the light of the world, and light has to do with salvation. There's a verse that says in Ephesians, thou that sleepest, rise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. He'll give thee light, because it's a picture of salvation. To receive light in the darkness of one's soul is salvation. And we see all the Bible tells us about the Son, and we realize that it must be a spiritual reference, especially when God tells us that what is happening to the sun, moon, and stars is taking place over a period of days. Mark 13, verse 24. In those days after that tribulation, the sun is darkened, and the moon does not give its light, and the stars fall. And there's no way the world's going to continue for a period of days if the sun is darkened and those sort of enormous things happen in the heavens above, the literal physical heavens. That would be the literal end of the world, not a sign. That would be it. Well, now you're bringing this up concerning Romans 4:11, and if we go there, it says, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, the righteousness might be imputed unto them also. So Abraham, God says, receive the sign of circumcision. And because the circumcision here is called a seal of the righteousness of the faith, that is true salvation. The reference to circumcision must be spiritual circumcision of the heart, as God says in Deuteronomy 30, I think it's in verse 6. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's a command of God in Deuteronomy 10, when he commands Israel, circumcise therefore the foreskins of your hearts. That's a command of God. And for those out there who say, well, God will never give you a command you cannot do, as we point out, God commands to believe, but you can't properly do it because you have a dead heart. Oh, God would never give you that kind of a command. If he commands you to do something, you have the ability to do it. Well, did the Jews have the ability to circumcise their own heart? There's the command in Deuteronomy 10, it may be verse 16. Yeah, of course not. Of course not. If anyone literally tried to circumcise their own heart, they kill themselves. never, please, anyone ever even think of it. Yet God commanded it. Why? To teach them. To teach them. He's not talking about physical circumcision. And then 20 chapters later, Deuteronomy 30, he says, I, Jehovah thy God, will circumcise your heart. You see, yes, God does give commands. We cannot obey due to our fallen condition. And the proper response to such a command is to go to God and say, oh, Lord, I desire a circumcised heart. You command me, I would want a circumcised heart, but I cannot do it. Will you, oh God, will you circumcise my heart? And there's God's response. I will circumcise your heart if we happen to be one of his elect. And but Abraham received circumcision, spiritual circumcision of the heart while he was unsaved. He became a child of God, and then God gave him the sign of circumcision, or then God gave him the rite of circumcision. God commanded Abraham to circumcise himself, his whole house. And so when it says he received the sign of circumcision, yet being uncircumcised, it must refer to the commandment of God given to Abraham. Abraham, circumcise your house. That's the sign of circumcision. The spiritual circumcision he already had. And where do you find that sign? Written in the Bible. You can look at Genesis 17. There is the commandment. You look to the Bible. You look to the Bible where God gave it to Abraham. He received the commandment in as a yet physically uncircumcised state, and yet spiritually circumcised when he received the commandment. The commandment is the sign. That's the sign. And you know, the sign of the prophet Jonah, read the Bible. How do you understand the sign, sun, moon, and stars? Read the Bible. Read the commandments of God. The sign is in the commandments. But thank you for bringing that up and sharing that. And let's, well, if anyone else has a question, you can reach us by calling the number on the screen and following the instructions that are posted on the screen, and we would be glad to take your call.